two topics we're going to cover today is fuel systems and air cleaners. So we're going to start with fuel systems. When it comes to the fuel system, one of the things people don't pay attention to is the fact that every fuel tank, the way a fuel system works, a carbureted system, is atmospheric pressure pushes on the fuel that's in the fuel tank, and that's what actually pushes fuel all the way through to the carburetor. Unless it has a fuel pump that will mechanically draw it, and even if it does have a fuel pump, if it's drawing fluid off the bottom, it's like taking a straw. You put your finger on top of a straw that has fluid in it, it'll hold it. And so every tank, whether it's a hydraulic tank or a fuel tank, has to be vented, and the cap that's on the top of the fuel tank has a hole in it. And if it's not on the very top, which tends to be one of the sources of water that gets in your fuel system, then it's through the threads. And if you look at the threads, there'll be a notch cut through the threads that allows atmospheric pressure to come up over through the threads and push on the fuel. And if you're having a problem and it seems to be erratic, you drive along, all of a sudden the thing dies. You sit there for a while and you can start it up again, and it runs for a little while and it dies. The one way to eliminate the fuel cap as being the problem is just take the fuel cap off. Take it loose and start it, see if it runs. If it continues to run, the screen, there's a filter built into the fuel cap and it gets plugged. It doesn't happen very often, but it's kind of frustrating when it does. So it's not a common thing people look at. So if it's not a vented cap, then what you have is another hole in the tank somewhere with a hose coming out. The tank will be vented yet. There are a few cars that are out there in the auto industry that have a pressurized fuel tank that are not vented. And when you take the cap off, it goes whoosh, air comes out. But in our industry, they will all have a vent somewhere. And if the cap is a non-vented cap, then the filter is, or the vent is somewhere else. You'll find that in two-strokes, two-cycle products. Instead of putting a vent in the cap, so when you flip it upside down, it runs fuel out. What they have is another place that goes up, and it kind of, the hose loops around, so when you flip it upside down, it doesn't run fuel out of the tank. So two-stroke, two-cycle products, you'll find non-vented caps. The tank is still vented, though. It's just where is it vented. First thing I want to talk about is diesel fuel. You guys are going to deal with 4 different types of diesel fuel when you get out there. And as operators, managers of golf courses, there's 4 different kinds. The 2 different kinds, the 2 major categories are going to be on-road fuel and off-road fuel. What's the difference between them? When it comes to on-road fuel is any non-dyed fuel. The predominant color that's pretty standard at this point is going to be, well, on-road, basically there's no. And if you look at diesel fuel just plain, it's going to either look really clear. In the winter it gets pretty clear. In the summer it gets kind of a yellow look. The thicker the fuel, the yellower it looks. And so basically we're dealing with a non-dyed fuel. And it's going to be a low sulfur fuel that we're going to be using. The other kind that we're going to see, which is off-road, is going to be any dyed color. And the most common color that you're going to see is red. And if you've been out there operating diesel equipment and put it in there, you've seen it. And the red signifies that it's low sulfur. And the difference between these two, does anybody know what the difference between them is? What's that? No. Red, blue is high sulfur. The only difference between them is price, and that price difference is taxes and the fact that they add dye. And so the reason why they add dye is so if you put it in your pickup and travel down the road and the state patrolman or someone pulls you over and pulls a sample, if they find dye in there, you get a fine. And it's a big fine. And a lot of people have been fined it. What is it now? 20,000. It's pretty substantial. And so I've heard different stories. One of them was up around the 20,000. Some they charge you per gallon that you have in your capacity of your machine. And so it's like a couple of thousand per gallon. So I've heard 2 different stories, and I'm not sure which one exactly it is now. It's pretty substantial. And I would imagine if you're a big over-the-road trucker that has 200 gallons, you know, I could see where charging it by the gallon would cost you more. So anyway, the difference is taxes. And the difference is pretty substantial. So it's 30, 40 cents up to like 60 cents. And so when you add that up per gallon and you burn a lot of fuel, that's a pretty substantial difference.